All right, you should have your packet of plugin notes to complete as I go through this presentation. And so we're just starting with kind of the very basics of business communication. And so we know as humans, we are raised to communicate, and it is basically just being able to give and receive information to someone else. That's what we consider communication. And there's four main ways that communicating can be done. First is through verbal communication. So that is just simply using words or sounds to express yourself. Then, of course, we have what we consider nonverbal communication. And this is expressing yourself without speaking by using facial expressions, just your posture, eye contact, all those little things that we can easily do that are not being communicated verbally. Then we have our written communication, and pretty simple, straightforward. This is writing information to share with someone else. And in the world we live in now, most of our written communication we actually consider to be more in that electronic line. So electronic communication is sharing information to someone else through the use of devices. So it might be computers for email or a video chat like Zoom, or just using your smartphone through text messages and things like that. So we have our verbal, nonverbal, written, and electronic communication has our four main ways to communicate. So as you grow and develop, and even still now today, you are learning the proper way to communicate with people because every situation and every interaction you have, probably you handle in a different way. For example, you probably communicate with your parents differently than your friends. So that same type of thought process will apply when you have a job and a career. You're not going to communicate with your coworkers or your boss the same way you communicate with other groups of people. And so you're going to need to learn just kind of some basic business communication skills to hopefully set you up for success in the work setting. So when we think of business communication, it is being able to share information with people within and outside of a business, but in that professional manner. And it is extremely important to be able to communicate in the business setting properly through any of those four forms: verbal, nonverbal, written, or electronically. Because a lot of times that kind of makes or breaks your job. You know, how well do you have that communication piece down? And I know with teaching for sure, communication is a big and integral part of it, as it is with most jobs that are out there. So now let's look at our written and electronic business communications and kind of some expectations that we would have when thinking of this in, the business and work world. So businesses expect employees to know how to properly and professionally do the following things. So write and mail a business letter, so being able to type it up, knowing the formatting, the setup of that, and really an important piece is not having any spelling or grammatical errors. They expect you to know how to compose emails and respond professionally. That piece really takes maybe a little bit more time than you think because we email all the time, in today's world. And so just making sure that you're keeping it professional, especially depending on who, are you dealing with within your organization. Is it someone, outside that works for a different company, a coworker who's on kind of the same level as you, a boss? All those things are going to be, responded to in a different way. They also expect you to work well on a computer and being able just to use its software. So being able to keyboard. So that's why we'll spend so much time doing that, using Office software. So Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and of course, knowing how to use the internet. It's also something that we don't think about, being able to answer the phone in a professional manner, because definitely as students, that's not something that you practice, but also leaving voicemails, with all of the necessary details and information when coming from that business perspective. Also being able to use online calendars, creating events, all of that. Anytime I have a meeting, that's outside of the school, a webinar, everything is set up through an online calendar. I sign up for my date and time. It's shared with me, all of that. Also the ability, especially ever since COVID, a lot of companies have embraced just kind of that Zoom world and video conferences. So being able to navigate that in a professional manner. All right, so now if we kind of look at the verbal and nonverbal expectations in the business world. So businesses are going to expect that you can speak with business terminology and sound professionally. Every type of business kind of has their own lingo. Here at the school, we have a lot of abbreviations and acronyms for different testing, like INSCAS and MAP testing and all of those things. And being able to use them and actually know what you're talking about, isn't always easy. So navigating that, dressing appropriately. So just to make sure when you begin working that what would be considered professional dress for that particular profession or that particular business. When I talk about this with my seniors, I say it's always better to ask what do they expect you to wear, because you definitely don't want to come in underdressed. Being overdressed is always better than underdressed, though, for sure, but just being aware of what would be considered appropriate professional dress for that particular job. And then just using the appropriate tone of voice. And so this is knowing your paralanguage, which is kind of the attitude you project with, how quickly you talk, the tone of your voice, any hesitations, things like that. Also having appropriate body posture, your body language, which can be really hard to think about because those are typically a lot of mannerisms that you just naturally do. It's just kind of part of who you are, but kind of trying to focus on those. And so we'll just watch this short video here.
Alice works at a local department store. She spends most of her day interacting with customers and coworkers. There's a lot of talking involved, but there's also another form of nonverbal communication that's being used just as often. Body language. Body language is the process of communicating through nonverbal signals. It includes things like our posture, facial expressions, gestures, and more. The meanings of these all vary from culture to culture, but we instinctively read body language and interpret it as some expression of moods, feelings, or intentions. So, in Alice's case, even before she speaks, she may be communicating all kinds of things to customers. For example, if her arms are crossed and she's avoiding eye contact, customers may not find her to be very approachable. However, Alice could be in a friendly mood, even though her body language suggests otherwise. And this isn't necessarily a conscious choice that she's made. This could just be how she habitually presents herself. But if Alice is aware of these habits, she can work on improving her body language. Changing your habits can be difficult, but if you take time to pause and check in with yourself, you can start to notice them and adjust things to become a better nonverbal communicator. This awareness can also be applied to reading others' body language. Let's say Alice notices that her coworker is unusually quiet, has his body turned away from her, and is slouched over. She may pick up that he's upset, or that there's an unspoken issue at hand. Depending on Alice's relationship with him, she may want to give him some space, or ask if anything's wrong. Being aware of the various aspects of body language can make all the difference in how people perceive you and how you perceive them. Be aware of how you present yourself, and you can say a lot without speaking.
So kind of like we went over there, body language is a lot of times just things we don't even think about or realize, but definitely something you want to kind of be a little bit more conscious about. All right, so now being an active listener, this is a very big piece of communication, and we'll do an activity with this later this week. But so while yes, the communicating verbally, non-verbally is huge. Also being that good active listener is another piece. So an active listener is someone who takes time to absorb information that another person is saying. And so when you have good listening skills, this enables you to absorb information that's needed, understand other people's viewpoints, recognize problems, and just being polite and professional. And so there's lots of different cues that give you an insight as to if you're having good active listeners. Are they making eye contact? Are they, shaking their head? They're agreeing with you. They're listening to what you have to say. Or does it look more like they are kind of tuning you out and kind of in their own world or doing their own thing? So definitely things to think about. As a teacher, that's often a big clue, as we're lecturing and doing things in our classroom, to gauge our audience, you students, how are you actively listening? Are you actively listening to our information? So this is just something to kind of think about. I'm sure you all have had some experience where you were talking to someone and you could tell that they weren't necessarily paying attention. Maybe they were on their cell phone, or kind of like I just mentioned, they're not making eye contact. They just seem to be in their own world. So just thinking about how can you tell those things and maybe try and make sure you are not doing those things. And then how does that make you feel, when you're having a conversation with somebody, but they're not truly listening to you. All right, next here, miscommunication is easy to happen. I think especially when communicating electronically. So how can we handle, when you maybe have to de-escalate with an argument? So miscommunication often happens when active listening is not occurring. And so it's just important to know how can we handle that. So we will watch a little bit of these videos to get some insight on that.
Whether it's at work, in a relationship, or just your everyday life, miscommunication can happen pretty easily. And that's okay. Let's take a look at a couple different reasons for why it happens and how you can deal with them. One big reason is not fully listening. We put a lot of focus on talking, but listening can be just as significant. It's important that both parties want to listen to each other and give their full attention. This is the difference between listening and just hearing. Try asking yourself, am I focused on what they're saying, or am I focused on what I'm going to say next? Being a good listener allows you to be more receptive and understanding. Lack of empathy is another reason for miscommunication. Empathy is the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings. This may come naturally to some, but it can be difficult for others. If you're willing to be open, you can really hear the other person and see where they're coming from. In doing so, it's good to validate others' feelings as well. This will make you both more comfortable and make communicating easier. Next time, ask yourself, why might this person feel this way? Or, how would I feel if I was in their situation? Through a mix of active listening and empathy, it's possible to reach agreements more easily, discuss opposing viewpoints, and turn miscommunication into effective communication. Disagreements happen all the time in the workplace. They're completely normal, but when they grow into arguments, that can be a problem. If you find yourself in an argument, your priority should be to de-escalate the situation before things get out of hand. First, breathe. When we get worked up, it's important to take a deep breath or two. This gives us time to think through things without letting our emotions get the best of us. Listen. In an argument, it's easy to shut the other person out and focus on your side of things. But it's important to give the other person your attention and really listen to what they're saying. A lot of times, people just want to be heard, and that might be enough to calm them down. Try not to interrupt them. Instead, put yourself in their shoes and try to understand why they're upset. Respond. Acknowledge the other person's feelings and perspective before communicating your own. When sharing your point of view, try not to raise your voice or use any insulting language. That will probably just make things worse. Instead, keep calm, focus on the facts, and try to stay professional. Consider your body language. Throughout all of this, you'll want to be sure you're not making any sudden movements or pointing at the other person. This could be seen as aggressive. It's also a good idea to not stand too close to them. This could cause them to feel threatened or tense. Dealing with conflict can be difficult, but if you practice these strategies for de-escalation, you'll have an easier time handling it.
All right, so while maybe you haven't necessarily gotten to an argument, at your place of employment, even these are just some good skills, to use at home with your parents or siblings or things like that. But definitely, I'm sure at some point, maybe it won't get into a heated escalation. You will have a disagreement with somebody that you work with. So just really taking time to think about how should I handle this? How am I not going to make it worse? And just using some of these tools. So it is important to always be professional at work, because getting into arguments or having just constant miscommunication could result probably in yourself getting fired, because that's just not a fun work environment. And like I said earlier, communication, regardless of what job field you're in, is just very big. All right, so the overall importance. So you're going to be working with many different types of people, and they're all going to have different types of personalities. And so just being able to communicate well is going to be key to some of your success within that workplace. It's going to help you guys all work more effectively, allow you to work well with other people, and just having you have that professional reputation within your workplace. And finally, we're going to wrap things up here with being a lifelong learner. So communication skills is not something you're going to be able to master necessarily in one day. One of the most important parts to being a great business communicator is just constantly learning the communication skills. Therefore, you're going to be learning more in depth about everything that we talked about today during this semester. We'll have lots of activities, videos, projects, just lots of things to help us further develop these communication skills. While our focus is communication, in any job that you have, probably being a lifelong learner is going to be key as well. In the education world, that's why we have our in-service days. The school will bring in some professional development for us to help us keep growing our skills as teachers. And so that's just important in all aspects of jobs. Now, I know that everything that you learn today and throughout the semester, it will be useful, regardless of what career path you're taking. Even if you're I'm going to be out working with people, working with my hands, you're still going to have to communicate. It might be more of that verbal communication, but it's still going to happen. So we're going to try and hopefully have this be as enjoyable as possible and truly, life skills, just like we had with personal finance. It's also important to stay up, with current equipment and software and just what are the professional expectations. I know that in my career field with business and even kind of the communication computer side of it, at the State Department, they are always talking to the people who are actually in those professions to see what skills are they wanting, to make sure that here at our level at the high school, we're preparing you for what the workforce actually wants. And so things you can do to be a lifelong learner, just the classes that you choose, even while just in high school, reading books or different articles, watching videos like we watch those really short YouTube videos, but that can help you learn some more skill sets. And then of course, practicing with other people. We'll have lots of little kind of role-playing situations where we work through some of these business communication type skills. So by now you should have everything filled in with your notes, and the sub will let you know if you have enough time, but just kind of a little review to see how well were you listening. You'll go ahead and get to Kahoot and be doing just this little short review game.